The music has stopped, the bar is about to stop, and we'll get started. So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for coming here tonight. We hope you enjoyed the reception. We hope you enjoyed the fantastic view. Believe me, there is a view out there. I have a lot of jokes and a lot of lines based on this view, so I was counting on it. We're 52 stories up in the air, and we're in a cloud. So this is the view for tonight. Maybe it'll change, maybe not. I don't know. We had wonderful music by my friend Andy Kahn, who's a professional performer, has a gold record to his credit, so keep that name in mind. We have comfortable chairs. We have a great program that we're going to do with a very high-level panel here. And I can tell you that, again, this is one of those jokes, but I venture to say that this is the highest level condominium program presented in the world at this time, tonight, unless there's one going on in an airplane. And I don't think there is. And so we go to the greatest heights to present you with the best information. All right, that's all those. I'm done with that. As you know, I'm Gary Crimstock. Most of you know me. If you don't, you will by the end of the evening. I'm a lawyer with Feynman, Kreckstein & Harris law firm. We're located in this building. This is our office building. I represent condos all over the city, all over the suburbs and the state, and I'm happy to represent all of them and see a lot of you here tonight who are my clients, and those that are not my clients, hopefully you will be by the end of the night, if not sooner. We provide legal services of all kinds for condominium associations, and most of you know what that involves. As a short census, how many of you were here last year for our seminar? Not in this location, about half. And how many are board managers that are here tonight? I'm sorry, managers. Managers of condominium associations. About half. And the rest, board members? How many board members? A good percentage. So that's a great showing. I'm happy to have that. You have a handout that was on your seats. I can draw your attention to that. So you'll see that on one side of it is some biographical information about me and our law firm. And you can check out our website for more information. That's on the left side of your handout brochure. There's also a couple of articles that we've written and published. And the first sheet tells you that my Pennsylvania Condominium Governance Handbook is in its third or fourth printing, and it's available complimentary to all of you. And if you leave your cards in the bowl at the table when you leave, if you haven't already received one, I'll be happy to send it to you. And the 1 millionth recipient of this free book is entitled to free set of tickets to the Phillies in the World Series this year. You don't think that'll happen? Okay. We're here tonight for a condominium program. I was at a condominium board meeting last night of my own condominium where I'm president. I'm at a condominium meeting tomorrow night for another condominium, and one the night after that as well. So you might think that I have no life, that I live, eat, sleep, and breathe condominiums, which is true. But I do have a life, and I brought proof here tonight for that. I have my wife, Gail, who is here, and she lets me go to all those meetings, and I wanted her to see that I'm really working tonight. And my son, Jeff Crimstock, is here. He's a condo manager in the city with Wentworth, and his fiancée is here, Tammy. So I'm happy to have them here and show you that I really do have a life. There are a few organizations that are represented here tonight as well. Let me briefly tell you about them. CAI, Community Associations Institute, is a national organization, 33,000 members, 60 chapters or more across the country. We have a local chapter, the Pennsylvania and Delaware Valley chapter, with about 1,500 members. I'm the president of that chapter this year. They are comprised of unit owners, managers, and business partners. They provide education to managers and professional credentials to them. It's an important organization. We have a legislative action committee, and we're active throughout the state, the Delaware Valley, as well as in Philadelphia. There's literature on the table when you leave that you can take that will give you more information about CAI. This is a little bit of alphabet soup. There's also an organization called GPCMA. That's the Greater Philadelphia Condominium Managers Association. I've been legal counsel to that association for many years. Jim Giblin from Kennedy House is the current president this year. We do have some literature from them as well. That organization is comprised solely of condominium managers throughout the city and the suburbs. They also have educational programs. We also have represented here tonight the GCCI, that's the Green Condo and Co-op Initiative. As you might imagine, that deals with sustainability and green energy issues for condos and co-ops throughout the area. They're headquartered at the Academy of Natural Sciences. I don't think Joan Baturi is here. She's the president of that organization. And we also have the Rittenhouse Square Community Coalition, RSCC. I'm legal counsel to that organization, and Herb Kaplan is the president of that, who is here this evening. And they are comprised of condos, apartments, hotels, businesses, and other buildings in the Rittenhouse Square area. All of those organizations, all of that alphabet soup, all of those organizations are hosting the first inaugural Condo Congress in Philadelphia on October 23rd at the Academy of Natural Sciences, where GCCI is headquartered, and they are the prime host for that event. It'll be a trade expo type of show, October 23rd, starting at 2:30 in the afternoon. There'll be some educational programs, and I'll be speaking there again. Those are the organizations that are here. We have a great program tonight. I'm going to speak later in the program, but right now I'd like to turn it over to my partner, David Feynman. He will introduce others in the room, our team from our law firm, and he'll introduce the panel of speakers. And I think I'll probably be the last speaker tonight to keep your attention and to keep you here. And then I'll do the wrap up later. So I look forward to talking to you later. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for coming. It is a pleasure to see all of you. We are, as a law firm, very lucky to have Gary with us. And he really is, on a nationwide basis, clearly one of the experts, certainly in the city, the expert on condominium law and how it affects all of you and how you live. I say that trying to be a little bit modest, but we do get calls periodically. The way you know this is when you get calls from your contemporaries. You know, you start to get calls from other lawyers who are asking you questions and asking you, can I speak to Gary about such and such an issue? So our firm is extremely lucky to have him with us. In the back of the room are some of the people who have represented you, I suspect, over a period of time. Evan Backhoff, Lee Applebaum, Josh Hurwitz, one of our new additions, Dan Muroff, who does a lot of lobbying work for various organizations throughout the city. So we're glad that we're all able to help Gary in this practice. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. It's very difficult to give a microphone to a lawyer and ask him to be brief, but I'm going to try to do that. All I'm going to do, quite frankly, is to introduce the speakers here. Some of them have long bios, and I'm going to try not to read them, although I'll need my glasses, Gary, which I left there. But we are very lucky, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming here tonight. For some of you, this might be difficult. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But for all of you, we really do thank you for coming here. And it is an honor to have everyone here. First person to Gary's left is Paul Levy, who I said to Paul, this will be a great opportunity because he and I have known each other for a long time, to say the least. At one point, it is Dr. Paul Levy, by the way, and at one point, Paul doesn't put this always on his resume, but at one point, Paul, during the Green administration, was at the Philadelphia Parking Authority as the director of planning, if I remember correctly, and I was outside counsel, so we did a lot of work together back then. But it is really an honor to have him here. For those of you who don't know, and I was looking at his resume, in 1991, Paul came up with the idea of having the Center City District. You know, this was something that was completely innovative. No one had really ever thought about that. And what that has done for the city of Philadelphia is remarkable. You know, we have a clean center city. We have people who are dedicated to keeping the center part of the town clean, viable, and an advocate for a center city Philadelphia, as well as the districts have now spread to, I know, West Philadelphia.
14 of them.
14 in Philadelphia. And again, you know, I talk about Gary for a minute. He's somebody who is called on regularly by cities throughout the country. And he's won all kinds of awards and sits on all kinds of boards and all that kind of stuff. But it really is an honor for us to have him here, and I really appreciate your coming. Next is Lisa Adams. She's from the Department of Licenses and Inspections, someone who we have to deal with regularly, an organization we have to deal with. And I would bet for those condo managers that are here, people who are here who do management work, an organization that you have to deal with. And there have been tremendous change in the Department of Licenses and Inspections. She's been there 23 years. She's a supervisor. And the Nutter administration has made remarkable change at the department, making it consumer friendly. People like Lisa are in charge of that, trying to make it as consumer friendly as possible, trying to make sure that you can get a license and without tremendous amount of hassle. There always has to be some, but people like her are here to help citizens rather than not to help citizens. So I want to thank Lisa, who's been a dedicated public servant for, she told me, in excess of 20 years. We'll leave it go at that, Lisa. And next is Lou Roseman, also a graduate of Central High School, which is more important to me than all the fine universities they went to, since I happen to be a graduate of Central High School myself. And so Lou is at the Mayor's Office of Legislative Affairs, would that be correct? In charge of that. We'll hear about, Lou was a lawyer, spent 9 years at the City Solicitor's Office. Prior to that was in private practice at some distinguished firms in the city, and has become a public servant as well. And you'll hear about efforts that the city is making. And last but not, in making in various areas. And last but not least, Richie McKethan, who the mayor brought here from Washington, D.C., now the chief assessor, would that be the title?
Yes, sir.
For the city of Philadelphia. So all of you, between Lou and Richie, I'm going to be extremely concerned about what the city is doing in regard to your taxes. They're going to be concerned about what is the so-called AVI proposal. We'll hear a fair amount about that, I suspect, and we're going to hear a fair amount about how the city is going to go about and reassessing the entire city of Philadelphia, and how it affects condominiums and the places that you live. And since I live in a condominium as well in Philadelphia, has a direct effect on me and my family a little bit. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing from them as well. So let me lead it off with Paul, and we'll take any questions. Paul, before you begin, there's two people that I want to recognize. first of all, I forgot to recognize Jim Rosenstein, who really has been the dean of the condominium bar, is off counsel to our firm, left a firm that doesn't exist any longer, and we were lucky to have him come with us, and written a fair amount, done a fair amount of work. Lawyers use his books. He also does a fair amount of mediation, particularly in the condo area. So I suspect all of you who live in condos have had some problems with people. It's the nature of what happens, and Jim is an expert on mediating those problems. And last but not least, I just want to thank people from Magna Legal Services who are filming this so that we can eventually put it up on our website. They volunteered their time. It's who we use for court reporting and other kind of services in the legal area. They've been longtime friends of our firm, so we want to thank them for coming here as well. So with that, Paul.
Thanks, David. I'm really delighted to be here and really share with you where we are. I want to thank David for the very generous introduction, but the idea was Ron Rubens for the creation of the Center City District. I had to just figure out how to make it work. And also that I think what would be helpful for me to do, I want to spend maybe 5 minutes just where we came from with the Center City District, how Center City's changed, because that really affects what we're proposing to do for next year. I also want to introduce over here on the left Tony Pipitone, who's our Vice President for Finance. He directly oversees our billing and collection operation. I know many of you already deal with Tony. But I thought I would just take a couple of minutes, one, to say why did we create the CCD, what were the challenges, very quickly, how has Center City changed, and then zero in on the conversation about how we're proposing to change how we deal with and bill condominiums for next year. So those of you who are not here, this was a delightful place in 1990, 1991. We were in the middle of a fiscal crisis. The city really looked terrible, and it was that crisis of a really litter-filled and fearful Center City, the fact that it really closed down at nighttime with security gates going down, that no one was out on the street, was the challenge that we really started with in 1990. We took advantage of a state law, the Municipality Authorities Act, that enabled us to create a Center City District, which is essentially funded by a surcharge on the assessed value of real estate, and I'll talk through that. We've been through 5 reauthorization processes, going back to the property owners, going into city government. We're in the middle of a 6th now, and I'll talk about that evolution. We operate according to a formal plan and budget, which you can find on our website, and in the back of the room, I think there are about 50 or 60 copies if you haven't received that, but that explains what I'll talk through tonight, our method of assessment, our method of billing, and all that information is what we sort of adhere to and which is available tonight. We started very simply. Downtown was dirty and dangerous. We started with a focus on clean and safe. So we have a uniform presence out there 7 days a week doing manual sidewalk cleaning, a staff of over 70 people doing manual and mechanical cleaning. We're out there pressure washing sidewalks, removing graffiti from buildings. And while things are not perfect when we survey people, a very overwhelming majority feel it's much cleaner than areas outside the boundaries of the district. Our second core program is a public safety program, a uniform, unarmed group of individuals who we call community service representatives, who patrol on defined footbeats throughout the downtown and who work in a really unique partnership with the Philadelphia Police Department. All the police who patrol on foot and on bicycle are co-located and work out of the same facility as our uniformed community service representatives, jointly planning deployment strategies, jointly planning a network of safety throughout the downtown. And the long-term effect of that has been, since we started, serious crimes have been cut in half. And those of you who remember 1990, when cars were broken into routinely and glass all over the sidewalks, that crime's been reduced by 75%. So a dramatic improvement in public safety. We also coordinate public, private security, condo, hospital, university security, meet regularly through the Philadelphia Crime Prevention Council, and I know many managers in this room are on, or if you're not, you can join. We have a text messaging alert system in partnership with the police to provide information about any events that are going on within Center City. So we started with a focus on clean and safe, In the mid-90s, we started to focus more on the public environment and then financed a broad range of capital improvements in the mid-90s. So we installed 1,000 trees, which we maintain, planters that we maintain. All the directional signs you see for pedestrians are one we installed and maintain. We maintain all the vehicular sign systems within the downtown as well. It's part of an effort to make the downtown legible, friendly to everyone who's here. In the last several years, we've done an amazing thing, tell people where the SEPTA buses actually go. So we have maps that we've put up with bus routes, and we are almost finished now installing new directional signage and information at all 108 entrances to the underground. So making the public environment clean, safe, friendly. Most importantly, in terms of nighttime safety, we've now installed almost 2,200 pedestrian scale light fixtures throughout the downtown. We have finished 70% of all the streets in the district. We aim to finish them over the next 3 to 5 years. And we've essentially doubled or tripled nighttime illumination and tried to create a much greater sense of safety within the boundaries of the district. We've also amplified that. The color changing light you see on South Broad Street, the facade lighting and statue lighting on the Parkway is all work we did to enhance the public environment. We then moved into improving parks with the opening of our first cafe on the Parkway at Cafe Cray, the revenue pledge to maintain the park. Most recently, we took a very derelict park, which nobody even knew where it was, Sister Cities in front of the cathedral, created a major place for families with children. This has been a hugely successful park for us. We thought we were creating a boat pond for civilized children in uniform, a little mountain stream, and of course this summer it was the best swimming pool for kids in Center City, but hugely successful for parents. A cafe, again, an information center a block away from the barns. We've most recently renovated the little tiny pocket park on 1707 Chestnut Street, creating just a quiet place in the office district which we maintain each day. Our biggest project today underway right on the west side of City Hall is a $50 million renovation of Dilworth Plaza, creating a mini Rittenhouse Square, new gateway to transit, a new cafe there that you'll sit there and look right up the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, and a programmable fountain that can be turned off that will do farmers markets, and for those old enough, bringing back winter ice skating to Center City. Used to be here in Penn Center. So very quickly, Center City in those 20 years has changed dramatically. We were a 9 to 5 downtown. Today, we're number 2 only behind New York in terms of major cultural institutions, arts and culture within the downtown. The investment in the convention center prompted a reuse of a lot of historic buildings. We saw a 95% increase in hotel rooms in the downtown, and that's had a major effect on my favorite activity in Center City, which is eating. You cannot lose weight living or working in Center City today. Just a dramatic growth in restaurants that have been driven by all those changes. Restaurant Week is our #1 promotion. It's coming up soon, so make your reservations. And then a real barometer, you used to have to fly to Paris to sit at an outdoor cafe. We had absolutely none in 1995. Last summer we counted 273, a real sign of animation and success within the downtown. But now coming to tonight's subject, and I'll zero in here, when we started the district, there was one major condominium building within the downtown. That's all we had was one major condo building. With the passage of the 10-year tax abatement in 1997, we count 171 buildings that were converted just within Center City, old industrial buildings, vacant office buildings to residential use. From Girard down to Tasker, 13,000 new housing units within the downtown. We are the fastest growing portion of the city, a 26% increase in population throughout the downtown over the last 20 years. But most importantly, from one condo, there are now 49 condominium buildings, and our district is that white boundary. What used to be just a business district has 49 major condominium buildings with over 5,000 units and 165 apartment buildings. So there's 30,000 people minimum living within what used to be an office district. So what I want to focus on is how have we responded to that change. Again, we are an independent municipal authority. We're authorized under state law, given approval by property owners in the city, but we exist independently from the city, so we bill and collect directly from property owners without the city as an intermediary. But we rely very much on what Richie McKesson is doing over at the Office of Property Assessment, because we take the assessed value for taxable purposes as determined by OPA. That is our source of data for our system of assessment. Our system of assessment is a fractional method. That is, we take the assessed value of an individual property as the numerator, the assessed value of our entire district as the denominator, and multiply that times our authorized budget to come up with our charge. We are doing the full assessed value without regard to abatement. So the Center City District does not figure in abatements. We assess at the full taxable value. As I said, we bill and collect directly. And to be clear, it's not a surcharge on the real estate property tax bill, although people talk about it shorthand that way. It is calculated as a relationship between the value of an individual property, the value of the district. For that reason, while AVI is very significant, it does not have a major change on the CCD's charges, because when we change values, the numerator will go up, the denominator will go up, and that relationship will stay the same. So we see it as a very important change for the city, but one that does not have an immediate effect on our bills. In billing, 62% of our revenue is coming from buildings like this, from office buildings, and you can see this year that 9% is coming from residential condominiums, and I'll talk about that. We have extensive fee-for-service activities. We clean the subway concourses, the regional rail stations, and adjacent neighborhoods, so our total budget's about $19.4. But it's these buildings right here that are the financial backbone of the district, and they're the top 10 ratepayers. These are also the top 10 taxpayers for the city of Philadelphia. But they are all buildings here on West Market and JFK, plus the Marriott. My point is that the major office buildings here are paying 20% of the total base of the district. Buildings like this, it's a very large number, but it's passed through so that if an average rent in this building is about $27 a square foot, the CCD charge is about 35 cents a square foot. So it's the density of these buildings that really carry the lion's share of our budget. But due to this dramatic increase in residential population and condominiums, we are in the process of changing how we assess condominiums. We worked with our state legislatures, we worked with Gary, and the state law changed within the last 2 years to change the way we assess residential condominiums. What we will do effective next year is not take the full value of a building and a condo unit, but 50% of it. We are reducing all charges to condominiums next year by 50%. And we'll do that by simply taking the numerator and cutting it in half and putting it over the full denominator. 2, under the change of state law, we have individually been billing every condominium unit. That will change under state law. We're sending one bill to the condo association as the benefiting property, and that will be the sum total of the charges in each unit divided in half. So dramatically simplifying, putting obviously a little bit more work on the managers in the building, but we think doing it the same way we assess this office building. We send one bill to this building and it's passed through. We send one bill to apartment buildings and it's passed through to tenants. We send one bill to hotels and it's passed through in room rent. So we're essentially moving condominiums to the same way we deal with all other property. We will not be using the new actual values in 2013. We're on a calendar year budget year. So we're going to use the same carryover values in 13 that were used in 12. When AVI happens, it won't have any impact on us until 2014. And then it will have an impact only if there's been an underassessed unit that goes up. But in general, we're not expecting to see a dramatic effect on our properties. I'll just quickly say that we went through an extensive process as the state law was being worked on, meeting. Gary called us, we had extensive conversations with him, met with most of the major condo managers. We then reached out again and then developed a new plan and budget, which we, as part of our reauthorization process, went through a process this summer of mailing it to all property owners, going through our formal process. We have now 1,567 properties in our district. At the end of our comment period, only 2 properties in the district objected to the plan. We're now going into City Council essentially for their final approval, but we fully expect that we'll be operating under that new plan starting January 2013. So the simple change is 1 bill to the condo association as the benefiting property. The charges are 50% of what they were in 2012. Let me stop there, and I think we're taking questions later, right? Great, thank you.
We're going to take, as Paul said, we're going to take some questions later. Gary whispered in my ear that I was extremely remiss in not mentioning the people who really have made this evening and make Gary and my life a lot easier, which is our assistant Lisa Rowdenbush, Adrian Loken, who's an assistant actually to Evan and Josh, and to Nicole Coleman, who's works in our administration, who put this whole party together. So I do want to take that opportunity to thank them. And with that, I want to let Lisa speak. There are some pieces of paper, as I understand it, in your packages. If you have questions and you don't feel like raising your hand, we'll have somebody that can pick those up for you, and I'll be happy to ask those questions if you'd rather do it that way. So with that, Lisa.
Good evening. The handouts are actually not inside of your packet. I believe they're out in the hallway. If someone needs a pack and they did not receive one, you can give me a call or shoot me an email, and I would be more than happy to get that to you. For those of you that have pens and paper, my name is Lisa Adams. My phone number is 215-686-1400. My email address is lisa.a.adams, A-D-A-M-S, @phila.gov. The department under the mayor has gone through a lot of changes, as you well know, and one of them is to make our department more transparent. And in doing that, under the former Commissioner Fran Burns, we developed a website. So we actually have our own website, which is, I believe, one of the first where it's interactive, where you actually can go on, and it's, if I remember correctly, it's about 24 to 48 hours before the information actually hit. So instead of calling me or anyone in the department, you can now go online to the city's website and you can view violation notices, licenses, any permits that are out there. If someone's working without a permit, you can report that through 311. It gives you a drop-down toolbar. So it's fairly user-friendly. And that started back in, I believe, July. What I did want to do is let you also know that on the website, there is what we have a zoning archive where you can actually go on and view zoning files. I don't know if any of you have come into the office in the past, but in 2008 and 2009, we started scanning our zoning files, so all of that is now online, and you will have access to that. So you can check the zoning instead of picking up the phone and calling someone and not getting an answer. Okay? I guess we're basically here for condos. For the condominiums now, everything that the department does is done using a valid BRT address, which is the legal address that the city uses. So if you have a building and you have an address and it's not the correct address, there's no way that we would be able to process a license application. You would not be able to make application for a permit or anything else with the department. That's very important. With that said, the BRT was assigned to the structure itself prior to them being turned into condominiums. Once they were turned into condos, each individual owner was assigned its own number, identification number. So the condo association is responsible for the structure in the common area. So any permits that are required for the entire building itself, it's going to be hard to make application without having a number. What the department did was the department has access, just for licensing purposes, to issue an identifying address for the condominium so that you can make applications. That's important because the condo association is required by law to maintain a housing license for the entire building. So if you have 300 units, then the condo association should have a housing license for 300 units. If the owner-occupied unit is no longer owner-occupied and that owner decides to rent the property out, they no longer need a license. The only license they were required is a commercial activities license, which used to be the business privilege license. As of today, that license is $300, but that license will be free as of 2014. The condo association can apply for housing licenses without paying for a commercial activities license as long as they are deemed to be nonprofit. So they would have to be registered with the City of Philadelphia as a nonprofit organization. If this is a new association coming into play, you can always make application online through the revenues departments, or actually you can actually go to LNI's website and there's a link allowing you to make application for the tax account number. And then you can make application for the housing through the mail, or you can come in person. There's also a high-rise license that's required for the high-rises as well. As long as the high-rise is strictly residential, the high-rise license is free, but it's based on square footage. But there must be a current housing license in place. If there are any commercial spaces within the structure, then you are required to pay for the commercial space, which is calculated as a penny per square foot. That information is in the packet in the back, as well as the website address for the zoning files if you wanted to see that. There's also information with respects to the dumpsters. There are 2 dumpsters that we license that we issue. We issue a private and we issue a public. So that information is there as well. I don't know whether this would affect you or not, but the city last week did a mass mailing for delinquent licenses. So some people may have received a delinquent bill. And what happened with that is that any license that had not been paid, a bill went out. So let's say for the sake of argument that in 2010, you had a license and it expired. And for whatever reason, you didn't pay 2011's license. You would not have received a new invoice thereafter because the system is set up to only deal with current licenses. There was a project done for delinquent licenses, and what they did was they went back and they sent out the bills. So if any of you would have received a delinquent license and you're not in agreement and you think that that is incorrect for whatever reason, you can always appeal that to the Tax Review Board.
They did go out. They did get them.
I was kind of hoping that they didn't. I'm being inundated with phone calls. One last thing. If you're making application for any work that needs to be done in the condo, what we're doing is, since you have to have an account, I'm asking that when you do that, you make sure that you use the account CA. So if there's anyone here that does not have a housing license, that did not speak with Josh, did not speak with Lisa, which means that they didn't call me and set it up, I'm asking that you get in touch with whomever you would need to get in touch with, or give me a call. I would need to know the condo association's name. I need their tax account number. I need to know that they're listed as nonprofit. I need to know a responsible party, mailing address, telephone number. Once that's set up, I would then ask anything you need to do with the department that you use that address. So if it's 200 Locust Street, then it would be 200 Locust CA. That would be your unit number. It has nothing to do with the Revenue Department or OPA because they're not using this. It's just something that we're doing internally so that you have what you need assigned to you. In the past, what's been happening is if you come in, and let's say you're doing pointing on the bricks, they're taking that permit and they're putting it under anyone's unit number, and that's not right because now you're making that owner responsible for that permit when it's actually the association. But we weren't equipped to issue it properly, and now we are. And that's it. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Louis Rossman. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs in the Office of the Mayor. I'm a resident of Fiddler Square neighborhood. I grew up in Fiddler Square. I'm very honored to be here on behalf of Mayor Nutter and Nutter administration. We're going to do this in 3 parts. I'm going to give you a quick introduction. Richie's going to come up and talk about property assessment, the actual valuation of properties, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about how we're going to be setting tax policy primarily in the spring, a little bit about the timeline of how that's going to work. First, let me say that we understand that the issue of fixing the broken property assessment, it causes a number of people a lot of anxiety, particularly that there are a lot of unknowns in what's going on. It's been discussed for many, many years. There was a big push last spring by our administration to try to get the system fixed in the spring. That did not happen. There was efforts through City Council and ultimately through state legislation to delay issuance of the new assessments for a tax year. It's actually going to be less than a year in when the delay and when the assessments will actually be issued. But there's been a lot of information about this happening without a great deal of information or sufficient information about what it actually means for individuals. I won't be able to give you all that information tonight either, but we'll try and give you as much information as we can about what the timeline is going to look like and where we're going with fixing the system. So there's 2 parts to this. One is what our property's worth, and the Office of Property Assessment is working very hard. They've been at work for 2 years on developing that. And then there's the how do you tax properties based on what they're worth, what's the tax rate, and what other measures are in place, like homestead relief, to deal with things like the changes in tax rates. It's changes in assessments. It's widely known that the property assessment system in the city of Philadelphia is broken. It has been for many years. Similarly situated properties, similar neighborhoods, similar houses can have very different assessments and therefore very different tax bills. Properties that are very different. One could be in a very nice neighborhood and one can be in a much rougher neighborhood. Properties can be in different sizes. The property in the rougher neighborhood may be smaller even than the one in the nicer neighborhood, and yet they have similar tax bills. That's just simply unfair. There are historical reasons for why that system developed. It's not really worth going into why we have that system today, but it needs to be fixed. Mayor Nutter was interested in this issue as a councilman. He pushed for reform in this area as a councilman. When he came into office, it was high on his agenda. In 2009, there was an effort to, the first step in the process was to change who did property assessments. For many, many years, it has been the Board of Revision of Taxes, a body that was appointed by the city judges, and that was subject to a significant amount of political influence. The proposal that was put forth in City Council in 2009 and ultimately went to the voters and was overwhelmingly approved by the citizens of the city was to create an independent Office of Property Assessment that would bring in a professional property assessor, professionalize the staff, and establish property values in the city that were accurate. Part and parcel of moving to an actual value assessment system is to get rid of the formula that we use to get our property taxes. The formula that's used right now is to take the value, which is generally an inaccurate value, multiply it by a percentage, the percentage is 32%. That's the number, the assessment number that is multiplied by a tax rate. So in addition to trying to fix the inaccurate assessments, we are trying to get rid of that confusing formula and simply take the value of the property and multiply it by what ultimately will be a much lower tax rate. So I'll get into that a little bit after Richie talks. So the OPA was created about 2 years ago. There was a national search to find a professional assessor to come in, make sure staff was adequately trained, was using the right tools to carry out assessments, was using professional standards. Richie, the person that was identified was Richie McKeithen, has a lot of experience in Virginia and Washington, D.C., doing assessments. He came in and his mandate was, in 2 years, fix the system. He's been working very hard at that. He's been working both in terms of reforming his office, reforming the policies in the office, doing the data collection work necessary to properly value the properties, and we are very close to the time when we will be able to issue those assessments. So I'm going to turn this over to Richie to talk about his work in developing the assessments, and then after that I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the timeline for setting the tax rate and tax policy issues that will come up after the assessments are issued.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Richard McKeithen, the Chief Assessment Officer for the City of Philadelphia. Let me start off by, first of all, thanking you guys for having us out here tonight. As Lewis stated, I've been here a little over 2 years now, and let me tell you, working hard doesn't even begin to describe what I have been trying to do ever since I got here to get us on board and get us up to speed as far as the assessments are concerned. Lewis kind of covered a lot of the history of the also property assessment, so I won't bore you with the elaborate details of that, but what I will talk to you about is the assessment process. How do we derive assessments? What are some of the things that are used? Sales and things like that. What are we looking at? Permits, how do they come into play? And then also talk with you about the ability to grieve an assessment. What are some of the steps that we have put in, the nuances that we have put in since my arrival? What is your recourse? And then talk to you finally about the Homestead program, which is a program that has been enacted recently to give you some relief from the assessments. The also property assessment is only there to derive assessments. In the past, we used to be a part of the Board of Revision of Taxes. We were split off. Now all we do is derive assessments. What do we do to derive assessments? And tonight I'm talking specifically about single-family residential assessments, namely condos. The way we look at valuing condominiums and single-family residences is to look at a common approach, which is the sales comparison approach. We look at sales that have occurred over the last 4 to 5 years. We will time adjust those sales, and we will look and try to predict what those actual properties would sell for today and what every property within our bailiwick of all 579,000 parcels would sell for if in fact they were on open market today. Those sales are scrutinized. I have evaluators that go out and look at them, review them, obtain information through various sources, interview property owners, interview people who have lived in a property and sold a property. All types of resources are reviewed to get the ultimate information about each property that has sold. And then we look at modeling these properties to try to predict what your property would sell for. In this process, we look at things like location. Naturally, as you've all heard, location is one of the major components that goes into what a property's net worth is. We also look at things like the square footage. That plays a major role in what a property would sell for. The condition of a property and any particular amenities that are special outside of what a typical property may have. We also, in addition to that, will look at things such as permits. Permits are things that we look at, and we have gotten a better relationship with the Office of License and Inspections to obtain permits that have been taken out by property owners to really upkeep their property, fix up their property and make it more valuable, make it more livable. We look at all of these things to try to determine exactly what a property is actually worth, and then we will apply it through modeling, through sales comparison to all the other properties in a particular condo regime when you're talking about condos. We attempt to try to stay within a regime naturally because regime is the most comparable degree of valuation that you can have when you're looking at condos. Oftentimes though, if we don't have any recent sales or we don't have sales that make any sense or we can't obtain information, we will try to look at a regime that is extremely comparable to the one that is our subject. But in 90% of the time, we have sales within each regime that give us some leeway to let us know what a property's worth. After we have done all of that, we will actually send out notices. Notices this year, well, for the next reassessment, will go out somewhere. Our goal is to get them out somewhere in mid-February. This will be an actual value of your property, as Lewis mentioned, the actual value initiative. This will be your property's value at 100% of market value, meaning this is what we think, a ballpark figure, what we think your property would sell for. From that point, you have the ability to grieve the assessment, and this is a nuance that I've put in since my arrival. As Lewis said, I come from Washington, D.C., where we have a very successful first level appeal process, where the actual property owner gets to contact the evaluator, come into our office if need be, and sit down with the evaluator and discuss what was used to derive their assessment, tell us what's wrong if you don't think it's accurate, and we have some discussion and some good conversation about your assessed value. From that point, and we're pretty confident that we'll get your value as accurate as possible, but you do have the ability to go to the Board of Revision and Taxes if in fact you don't like our decision at the first level, and ultimately the Court of Common Pleas. From that point, let me give you some information about the Homestead Program. The Homestead Program is a program that was recently enacted, which right now I think we're looking at $30,000, Lewis?
That's what the current council law says.
Okay.
That could change in the spring depending on part of the policy discussion.
This will take off $30,000 off of your assessment, and then your bill will be calculated with the tax rate that's voted on by City Council. To qualify for this program, you merely need to be a single-family residential homeowner or live in the property as long as it's 4 units or less, and have that as your primary residence. I know a lot of you have probably gotten a homestead application in the mail. If you haven't, we've left some literature in the chair for you to review during this time period. All right, I will turn it back over to Lewis to go over some policy things, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
So let me talk a little bit about timing. This year, the vast majority of tax bills that go out will be based on assessments, the current assessments on the books. The state law that allowed us to put off doing the AVI change for a year specifically says use 2010 assessments, except if there has been significant renovation or if a property was torn down and there's just a lot there, we should adjust those assessments based on significant changes in the property. But we're not using the new assessment model for this year. So there's a very small percentage of properties, about 1% of properties, 5,000 properties. There's 500,000 in the city. More than that, less than 5,000 will get a new assessment notice. Otherwise, you will get tax bills this year like you normally do in December, due in March with the 1% discount if you pay, I forget the exact date, but sometime in February. Under this new state law, we are required, normally the old law was that assessments had to come out in September and could be appealed in October, and then tax bills were sent out in December. Because of the issue about setting the tax rate without knowing the values of the properties, that was the main issue that came up in City Council that led to putting off doing this for a year, was that we did not know the values of the properties in connection with setting the tax rate in the spring. It would have had to have been done by a formula to back into the tax rate. The state law now says that the assessments have to be sent out by the end of March, and then there's a fairly lengthy appeal period under law, and then the tax bills will go out as they always have in December. We actually plan, as Richie said, to send out assessments before that, to send them out in February. So that is when people will know what their individual assessment is. We expect to know more general information, the aggregate value of properties in the city, sometime in December. That's important because in order to figure out roughly what the tax rate is, we need to know what the total value of all the aggregate value of all the properties in the cities is. Essentially, to get a rough number of what the tax rate will be is what would the tax rate need to be multiplied by that total value of all properties to get you the amount of money that you're trying to raise. And the amount of money that the administration plans to propose for next year is the same amount of money that was generated for the school district and for the city as this year. So without a change in generating revenue, you can figure out the tax rate once you know the total value of all the properties. It's the rate that you would need multiplied by that total value to get that sum of money. So there will be more information towards the end of the year. It will likely be covered in the press. It will begin to be talked about in city council about what's the tax rate going to look like. I can't tell you what that is. We often get questions about it. People are very anxious. What if it's 2%? I can't say with any certainty what the number is going to be. It's likely to be in some range between 1% and 2%. Let me talk about how assessments are going to affect people differently. People are generally assuming, I think, that because assessments will be going up, everybody's tax bills will be going up. That's not correct. First of all, we're going to be dealing with the shift from 32% to 100% value. Automatically, that means that's essentially tripling the values. In order to compensate for that, the tax rate will need to go down an equivalent to be 1/3 of what it is now. So we have something like a almost 10% tax rate. Let's say it's 9%. You would need to bring it down to 3% to account for the going from 32% values to 100% values. But putting aside the change from 32% to 100% for a minute, whether someone's tax bill will go up after the change in assessments is a function of whether their current assessment is where it is relative to everybody else. Let's say that all values in the city, the old BRT numbers compared to the new OPA numbers, let's say that they will triple. My house is valued at roughly $180,000, something like that. And let's say my house is going to be is actually worth $550,000, roughly 3 times that 180. That would make me an average property in the city of Philadelphia if we think that the current aggregate values of all the old BRT assessments is one number, and the aggregate number that we get in December from OPA is 3 times that amount. If your value right now is not 1/3 of where it's going to go, but is half of where it's going to go, you're much better off than the average homeowner who would, if we're going to triple on average. If you're going to simply double in your assessment, your tax bill is going to go down. And that's because the tax rate will be dropped dramatically to compensate for the fact that average. If assessments on average are going to triple, the tax rate will be cut to 1/3. Some people's, if your current assessment is 1/4 of where it's going to go, if you're going to have, it's going to go up 4 times, your tax bill is likely going to go up. That is, if average is 3 times and you're at 4 times, you're going to go up. if you're doubling, you're likely to have a bill that's going down. Those are very rough estimates. Those are not exactly where things are, but very rough estimates. The reason some people's bills are going to go up is because some people, relatively speaking, have had assessments that are too high. If your assessment is only going to double, it means that relative to your neighbors or to other neighborhoods in Philadelphia, you've been paying too much. That's the system that we're trying to fix. That some people have had assessments relative to the average that are too high, some that have not been high enough. There's going to be a lot of talk come the spring about relief measures. What can be done when people are going to see, if they can see significant increases in their tax bills. Homestead will help some people with increases in their bills, particularly residential properties relative to commercial properties, because only residential property owners will get homestead relief. There will be other relief measures discussed. There's currently in law a freeze for senior citizens at a very low level of income. If you are PACE-net eligible, PACE or PACE-net eligible, you can qualify for a senior freeze on your real estate bill. There will be other relief measures discussed, how to deal with the significant changes in bills that some people may see. Keep in mind, as that policy debate goes along, that however much relief is given to people whose bills are going up has to be paid for. There needs to be a way, if the city is going to take in the same amount of revenue from property taxes and not cut services, but it's going to take in the same amount of money, any amount of relief you give to people to say you don't have to pay the full increase that you otherwise would pay has to be paid for by an increase in the tax rate for everyone else. So it's important that we have some sort of relief measures in place to to deal with people in most vulnerable situations, but it has to be done in a measured way because it affects everybody else as well. Last thing on the homestead relief that Richie talked about, we're asking people to send their applications in by November 15th. If you do that, we'll be able to reflect on your property assessment bill whether you've applied for the homestead or not. You can apply for it after November 15th, but we are encouraging people to do so. With that, I'll wrap up and can respond to any questions if you have them.
I know you probably all have some questions about this complicated future that we have in store for us. I have a few more mundane day-to-day issues to talk about, current trends, hot topics. I'll cover that briefly, and then we'll go into the question and answer period. So I wanted to talk to you, first of all, to put this in some context, probably preaching to the choir here, but just to give you some background. This is an important issue. We're all involved in this industry. I am kept very busy in this area of practice because in our country we have over 300,000 community associations, common interest communities, which includes condos, co-ops, and HOAs, homeowner associations. In 300,000 plus communities, we have over 60 million residents in this country living in the kind of communities that we live in and work with every day. In Philadelphia, as best we can tell, we have over 1,000 community associations, most of them condos. We estimate about 75,000 residents in those communities. And the law is fairly new, although you may not think about it in those terms, but condominium law, particularly in Pennsylvania, goes back to 1963, the first act, the Unit Property Act. Now we have the Uniform Condominium Act. So the law, the evolution of law in this area is about 50 years old now, which is pretty new for laws. So we have issues that we're confronted with every day that we have to deal with. And in your packets, I forgot to mention on the right side, I told you about the left side. On the right side, is the agenda for this program this evening. And there's an outline of my presentation, so it has the topics on there. And let me briefly go through those. Capital repair projects, which a lot of, particularly in the city, a lot of the buildings have to deal with these days. We have 40 and 50-year-old high-rise buildings that were either converted or built from ground up as condominiums. So they have aging infrastructure, and that means that they need to be maintained. That's the obligation of the association and the board. So we have some major projects. We've had, some buildings have had projects going up to $25 million for capital improvements, for balcony repairs and facade, building envelope restoration, HVAC system renovations, windows, a lot of you are familiar with that. Those are major capital issues that need to be addressed, and we have reserve accounts to provide, in theory at least, for those repairs. But we're also confronted with some documents, condominium governing documents, have restrictions on spending. Some of them are tied to the budget. You can't spend more than 10% of the total amount of the budget, or you can't spend more than $10,000 or $25,000 or $50,000 without usually a supermajority approval vote of the unit owners. Sometimes there are limits on borrowing. You can't borrow without specific unit owner approval. There are times that we may be able to sidestep some of those issues. We may be able to include these expenses in our actual budget, and then it becomes subject not to an approval vote in advance by a supermajority of unit owners, but it becomes subject to a rejection vote by a simple majority of the unit owners, usually within 30 days after the expenditure is announced. And sometimes the unit owners are able to reject that expenditure, sometimes not. Sometimes this is an area that requires an amendment of the documents. There are various funding alternatives for capital repair projects. You can spend your reserve funds or a portion of your reserve funds. You can do special assessments, which no one generally likes to do. And you can do bank loans. And bank loans have evolved to be a very unique type of lending situation. There aren't a lot of banks, and there aren't a lot of local banks that are in this business now, but it's growing, and there are some regional and nationwide banks that specialize in condominium loans. And you have to keep in mind that the association does not own the property, doesn't own the collateral, so you can't pledge the real estate. So this is a unique situation for banks who are used to taking an interest in the collateral, mortgage on the property. They can't do that here. You are allowed, if you happen to own a unit as an association or two, or some ground, you are allowed to pledge that or mortgage that generally under the law and under the condo documents. But more likely, the only thing that you can offer as collateral is an assignment or pledge of the future assessment income coming in. And the banks know that this is what their collateral is. They take an assignment of that, and they actually take an assignment of the association's right to impose special assessments if there's a shortage of funds coming in. The one thing that you can't do under the Condo Act, you can't do as a matter of law, is pledge a reserve account. So keep that in mind if you're dealing with any banks. The next issue, problem residents. We all have them. Sometimes they're just belligerent and difficult to deal with. Sometimes they have aging issues that we're seeing now, that our field of housing has become matured, let's say. 50 years of law means 50-year-old buildings. It means people who maybe have been residing in them for 30, 40, or 50 years. And you have age-related problems, health issues, both physical and mental. And these are challenges for the condo associations. First of all, we have to recognize that we are a condo association. Our authority and duty and responsibility is to maintain the common elements and the property and to preserve property values for our owners. We are not caregivers. We are not a healthcare facility. We are not a life care community. and we can't fulfill that role, and we shouldn't even attempt to do so. So we do need to look for outside intervention. We need to look for social services that are available. We need to get family members or friends of the resident involved to try and deal with them. We do have certain leverage as an association. It's not something that we often like to use, but we do have self-help remedies that are not always available to in other areas of the law. We do have the right to access our units. We do have the right to go in there to inspect them, to make repairs, to remedy any problems, to prevent property damage that's being done, to eliminate noxious odors, to eliminate infestation, to protect residents and their property. And if that means drilling out the lock or using the key that we have or taking the door off, we do have the right to do that. A lot of associations would rather use due process of law, so we will go into court to seek an injunction, and we're doing something that's very unique because it's not a landlord-tenant situation. You can't evict the resident. They have a property right. They are an owner. You can evict them under certain circumstances. You can get a court to order that they can still certainly own the property, because you can't take that away from them, but they can't reside there. And that is a court order that we can get, but it needs to be based on a compelling argument. You need to have persuasive information. You need to document your file and have it all in order before you do that. Smoking ban. This is an issue that's come up recently. We have two large properties in Philadelphia that I've represented where it has been done. We have a smoking ban that was adopted by a rule and regulation of the board, the executive board, rather than a vote of the unit owners. It's done on a health basis because, as you know, even secondhand smoke has been determined to be dangerous to your health. Most condos have rules against noxious odors, so you can use that as a foundation as well. And in our older buildings, they're not airtight. The ventilation systems allow odors and smoke to penetrate through walls, under baseboards, through vent systems, in the hallways, under the unit doors where there are gaps. So you have situations where it's difficult to control the smoking situation if it's become a health hazard. And the buildings that have adopted it, of course, some of them have sought a consensus of unit owners before they've done it. You do need to put in some grandfathering provisions. You can't just tell everyone that tomorrow they cannot smoke. But you can put in the grandfathering provisions, and it has worked. And as far as I know, in these two particular buildings, it has not been challenged in the courts, and it's effective. And we're talking about no smoking not only in the common areas, we're talking about no smoking in the units, which are privately owned, no smoking even on the balconies, because the air is drawn in to the units as well. And you may or may not consider, in some properties they have a pool or another area, an outdoor recreation area where they may allow a particular segregated area for smoking. But the smoking ban is something I think we're going to be seeing more of. Rental restrictions, that's a double-edged sword. Most people will say that they'd rather not have rentals in their condominium property because tenants do not have an investment in the property and don't maintain the properties as well as the owners, and that may be true in a lot of cases. But you also have a depressed real estate market now, and if you have rental restrictions, you may be creating a difficulty for your owners in trying to sell their units or in trying to afford to pay condominium fees if for some reason they have to be transferred or they move or they can't afford it anymore, and they'd like to be able to rent it and have a flow of money coming in so that they can keep up with their mortgage, their taxes, and their condo fees. So sometimes rental restrictions can be a problem, and you can shoot yourselves in the foot, really. But there is a need for it because we have lender criteria, particularly FHA and the other governmental underwriting agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they have limitations on the amount of rentals. Generally, FHA now will allow up to 50%, just under 50% in rentals. Anything over that will disqualify the property for a Fannie, Freddie, or FHA mortgage. We do have the authority, generally under condominium law, to put in certain rental restrictions, but you have to carefully look at the governing documents. Most of the governing documents already have some restrictions, usually that limit it to 1 year, requires the lease to be in writing. We put lease addendums onto them. If you have a restriction of that sort, and you want to restrict it even further, you may need an amendment to your documents. And once again, you have, if you're going to be effective with it, you have to have exceptions, and you have to have grandfathering. Usually you allow exceptions for hardship situations where you give someone a 6-month period to try and rent the property. Mortgage lenders who foreclose want to have the right to be able to lease the property if they can't get it sold, so it affects lenders as well. In the fair housing area, we have 2 federal laws generally that cover this area, the American with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988. The ADA generally refers to places of public accommodation. A lot of you got information regarding the ADA rules about swimming pools and having accessibility ramps or lifts that will allow disabled persons to use that pool. There is an exception for that for condominiums if they do not hold those facilities out to the public and offer them to outside members or rent it out for parties or other facilities. So if it's strictly a private pool, it's not subject to that ADA requirement. Generally speaking, the ADA refers to places of public accommodation, movie theaters, restaurants, houses, buses, not houses, stores, theaters, that type of thing, where the FHAA, Fair Housing Amendments Act, refers to places of private accommodation, which includes condominiums. So when you have a request that's made for under the Fair Housing Amendments Act for either a reasonable modification, which is a structural or physical change to the property, such as a ramp or a lift or automatic doors or something like that, that's an accommodation that you may have to grant under federal law to give disabled persons their federally protected rights. But in a reasonable modification case, the party requesting the modification has to pay for it. In a reasonable accommodation, which is different, the accommodation is to change your rules or policies where it doesn't present an unreasonable administrative or financial burden on the association to make a reasonable accommodation in its rules or practices. And that includes parking spaces, someone that may need a handicapped parking space. If it means you have to put up a little sign or paint a handicap logo on the ground, that's a minimal expense. That's a burden the association has to undertake, and you have to grant that if it's possible. If you've sold parking spaces, you can't take someone's property away from them to give that space to a handicapped person. The other large area, and I'm actively involved in this right now, as are others in this room, is dealing with assistance animals. That's an area where we're likely to see more activity. There can be and is a lot of abuse in that area, but generally speaking, if a person who is eligible under federal law as a disabled person and they have a health professional that will say that they need an assistance animal, which doesn't just have to be a dog, to help alleviate one or more of their symptoms, and they can document it, then you have to give them that accommodation. If it's a no-pet building, you have to allow those pets, and you have to treat them as if they don't even have a pet. So it is a large hurdle, though, to overcome. Some doctors will write the notes very easily, but it is a large hurdle because a person who is qualified as disabled under federal law needs to have a severe mental or physical impairment that affects one or more of their life functions. So that's a serious impairment that they need to have. There's also issues regarding familial discrimination. That comes into effect with swimming pools, often in occupancy. You can't necessarily limit pools to adults only at certain times and children at other times. You can put regulations in if you have a kiddie pool or if they're wearing diapers, that sort of thing, but you can't discriminate against children, let alone discriminate against unrelated individuals. You can't have a restriction that says 2 people can live in a studio apartment as long as they're related, or they have to be husband and wife. You can't have that. So the limitations need to be more like occupancy based on the number of persons, usually per bedroom. Typically no more than 2 people per bedroom. Can't say 2 adults, can't say 2 related persons, 2 people per bedroom. Delinquencies, we're all dealing with that more and more these days. We're not a sand state. That's Florida, Nevada, Arizona, and California. So we haven't been overbuilt. We don't have a lot of the huge destruction in values that they've experienced in those states. But we do have more delinquency problems. You have to be more aggressive in dealing with them as we are in the buildings that we represent. There is an automatic statutory lien under the law for any condo assessments that are not paid. So you have the right to enforce those liens. In fact, you have to enforce them within 3 years. We like, if a unit is rented, this is a case where we like to have rental units, because if the unit owner is delinquent and there's a flow of rental income coming in some buildings, if you have the right language in your documents or in your lease addendum, we can go right to the tenant and collect that rent instead of them paying it to the landlord. In other situations, you get your judgment against the unit owner, and then you can attach the rents that are coming in and collect them. So that provides a source of income to the association they might not otherwise have. There are more bankruptcies that are being filed regarding units owned in condominiums. That's a real difficulty because that stops all the proceedings, and they are entitled to a fresh start, and they are entitled to protection under federal bankruptcy law, so that any pre-petition, pre-filing of the bankruptcy debts and that are delinquent, that they have not been paid, will ultimately be discharged and we can't collect them. Our lien against the real estate is still good, but usually that's not worth much because the property is already underwater with its mortgage. And then we have lenders who are adding to the issue with delinquency problems, because while they may not be getting paid in their mortgages, most of them have been fined for their mortgage foreclosure practices, and as a result, the foreclosure process has stalled and been delayed to a great extent, so that the 6-month priority protection under the law that we've had all these years, that was designed to give, must be a lender calling. We have a 6-month super priority in mortgage foreclosures that always protected the associations, because most foreclosures would be over within 6 months, and we could collect our 6 months of delinquencies and be in a much better position. Now the foreclosures are taking years. So while the owner is not paying the mortgage, the taxes, or the association fees, we are limited to a 6-month priority, super priority, when eventually it goes to a sheriff's sale, and the association is out of pocket and out the rest of the money. So it's become a real problem. Insurance, just talk briefly about that. The issues that are related to insurance are gravity. In high-rise buildings, gravity pulls it down, particularly water. We have water leaks all the time. There are types of policies that the association should have. There's a trend to move from a single interest type of policy to a bare walls policy, which means that the association only covers up to the bare walls of the particular unit. The unit owner is responsible for everything from the bare walls in. And in those situations, it's imperative that the unit owners have their HO6 individual insurance policy. Any Fannie, Freddie, or FHA mortgage will require the unit owner to have an HO6 policy. There are some provisions in dealing with insurance situations with condominiums that are counterintuitive. So it requires an education of the unit owners, because they will automatically assume that if there's a leak from a common element, from a common pipe in the wall, and it comes into their unit, that the association, just like a landlord, has to be responsible for it and will pay for any of the repairs necessary in their unit. That's not the way it works, because the only time that that will happen is if there is negligence on the part of the association, and that's difficult to prove. We don't know what's going on with the pipes inside the walls any more than anyone else does. So if the damage flows from that type of a leak, the association has to repair the leak, has to repair the common elements, and the unit owner is responsible for the repairs within their unit. They don't often understand that. That's why they need to have HO6 policies, and a lot of condominiums are changing their documents to require that HO6 policies be purchased by the individuals. The mortgages, the mortgage situation today is in chaos. It's a mess. It's difficult to get mortgages approved for owners of condos who want to refinance or for buyers who want to buy. There are mortgage questionnaire forms that are sent to the managers. The managers have a lot of difficulty in completing them. They're different. They change them all the time. They ask for signatures. They ask for legal opinions that the managers are not able to give. They ask for information that the managers don't have, and they put all this blame on the managers and the association that your purchaser or your seller, your unit owner, won't be able to sell their unit unless you cooperate with us. There's not actually an obligation on the association to do that. Certainly you want to preserve property values and help your unit owners, so you do want to see financing go through. But you can't go beyond what your authority is. You should not be writing legal opinions. You should be aware that regardless of what you write, the loan may still not be approved because it violates lender criteria. And that leads into the last item, the FHAs. As you may know, FHA is now responsible for 1/3 to 40% of the mortgages of condominiums. That's evolved because now the maximum FHA loan in this area, in the 5-county area, is $420,000. And the minimum down payment is 3.5%. So it's hard to find loans like that anywhere else. So FHA loans are more prevalent for condominiums. There used to be a spot loan approval process where an individual would apply for an FHA mortgage and it could be approved for that individual unit. That's no longer the case. Spot approvals have ended. You now have to have a project approval. It has to be in advance, has to be done for the entire property, for the entire building. And believe it or not, it's important for all buildings, not just the ones that may have lower priced units, but even the more expensive units, because most of the criteria that you have to meet for the FHA is the same or similar to the criteria for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and for other lenders as well, and they look for that approval. The requirements are strict, they're changing every day, and there's a certification when you submit your package to get project approval that says that if anything is untrue and something like a perjury kind of penalty, that you're subject to a fine of up to $1 million and imprisonment of up to 30 years just for signing this form to request FHA approval. So that completes my presentation, and I'll turn it back to David and we'll have some questions and answers, and then I'll do a wrap-up.
Okay, thanks, Gary. We promised everybody we'd be out of here by 8 o'clock, I think, or a little bit before. So let me just ask if there are any questions. If we have any questions of anybody, we're happy to take them.
I have a question for Louis Rossman. Do you know if, given the state of the taxes now, will the 10-year tax abatements be continued, or for new projects, or are they going to collapse them? Because as an older building that's been here 50 years, I wouldn't mind an abatement for all the new things that we have to put into our building, and I know that's not going to happen. And it makes me a little green with envy when I see new buildings going up and they're getting 10-year tax abatements.
Right, so the abatement policy discussion is an important one. It's one that may happen side by side with the policy decisions that go on next spring in connection with the shift to actual value. Councilman Good has introduced a bill that would change the abatement from a 10-year abatement to a 5-year abatement. That would not be a full abatement for the full 5 years. It would level off. It would be reduced throughout the 5-year period. I get a lot of questions and discussions like this about the abatement program. Many Philadelphia homeowners are envious of their neighbors who have an abatement. We should keep in mind that when people have an abatement, it's because when they purchase their property, they paid for that in some way. The developer who develops a property, the reason the abatement is in place, the abatement program is in place, is to encourage developers to build new properties. And when the developer does that, they know that they can sell that property for more money to the buyer, to the condo buyers, say, because the condo buyers know that they won't pay property taxes for a 10-year period. So we shouldn't assume that there's a discussion sometimes in the council, the debate about the ABI policy of giving relief to everybody else since the abatement owners have this great deal. We should keep in mind that the abatement owners have paid, the owners of an abated property have paid for that in some way. Generally they're paying the developer who has built the property a premium because they're buying an abated property. That's not to say that we should necessarily continue the abatement program. It's an important policy discussion about, is the abatement program needed to encourage development in the city? As Paul Levy pointed out, there has been enormous condominium development in Center City. Surely some of that is attributable to the abatement program. But there's an important policy question of, do we need that level of abatement? Could it be lowered in order to continue to promote property development in the city?
I'm not trying to create a debate, but Paul, I'd like to hear what your views are about that, and has it really helped the development of Center City?
Yeah, well, let me just, I consulted with my attorney to my right here, but a major condominium building doing substantial rehab is eligible for the 10-year tax abatement. So it's not that you can't get it, you can get it for substantial rehab of an existing property. So I'll refer to my attorney here on the right on that one. So it's not an either or choice. I think the 10-year abatement clearly was hugely important in jump-starting what's happened here in Center City, happened across the city. In fact, there are more abatements issued outside the downtown than inside the downtown. And so I think it's been extraordinarily helpful because the development costs in the city were much higher than market value. There's a lot of resentment that you're hearing out there as well at this point. But I think at this point it's been so positive for the city, and particularly now where we are in the cycle, starting over the next several years, the huge amount of money, first starting 5, 6, and then jumping up to 18, 19 million dollars that will be rolling off of abatements. So we've had this 10-year period, but those abatements, which really went into high gear, will start returning a great deal of money to the city.
What dollar figure constitutes a large enough project for this abatement?
Yeah, any improvements to real estate are subject to the abatement, any amount. But you would probably only do it for substantial improvements, supported by building permit.
I think Richie has
It's a typical appraisal type scenario. you have to do enough improvements to increase the value of the property, and you got to be very careful about that nowadays because value is not always synonymous with what you put in. So most of the projects are going to be major to make sure that they, get over that hurdle.
You also remember on an individual unit basis, assuming that your unit owner
goes out and does what is appropriate by getting a building permit, they then can apply for an abatement as well for the improvements that they do to their individual property. Which might lead me to a question that I have for Richie, which is, we spoke about it a little bit. Our office over the years has represented 3,000 to 4,000 condominium unit owners before the Board of Revision of Taxes, prior to the time of the reorganization, I would say. Has your office thought about how the values will be determined in individual buildings? What kind of process will be used? Will it be done on a stacked basis? Will it be done on a square footage basis? There are a few different ways in which these buildings can be assessed. The individual unit owners' buildings can be assessed.
Yeah, we're looking at a multitude of possibilities. Square footage basis naturally is one that's very near to us in the appraisal industry, but on a per unit basis. And then we look at things like, as I said before, where you are in the condominial regime. What's your view? How high are you? Where are you actually as far as location in the building? Some of the lower level condominiums are traditionally not as valuable in a lot of instances. So right now we're looking at a multitude of different ways to value and then cross-check our values to see how much continuity and sense they make.
The other thing I'd like to make one comment to you, Richie, which I would hope you at least take back, which is that it sometimes becomes very difficult, and particularly units, high-rise units in Center City, Philadelphia, where you have all kinds of different people living, from young people to senior citizens, to take appeals, come down and talk to you. I hope that you would consider at least allowing an association to at least go through the process informally with you, rather than forcing every individual owner to come down to see you. I think it'll actually create a little bit of a better atmosphere in your office as well, and would hope that you would consider something of that sort.
Well, let me reiterate the fact that our first level process, you don't have to come down. You can call evaluate and speak with them via telephone. I don't want everybody to get the impression that they have to march down to OPA, try to find a parking space, have the PPA chase them around. You can contact us over the telephone. You can email us. You can do any multitude of things to ensure that your argument is heard.
Okay, do we have any further questions? Going back.
Gentlemen, along with the abatement issue, if the tax abatement, if a property is doing millions of dollars worth of work on their building, they don't own any commercial property, they don't pay any real estate taxes, how does that relate back to unit owners getting some of that abatement?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the question is directed.
I
I'm not
think
sure what the question is.
your question is, how does a unit owner get any benefit from an abatement, assuming that there are improvements to the common elements?
Correct. But the association doesn't pay taxes, so if there's nothing that's going to happen, if they do $10 million to redo their lot.
Well, and Mark, that ties in to actually this last discussion, because the point is, the association doesn't get the abatement, doesn't get the tax benefit. That flows to the unit owners. We're the only ones that have tax accounts and are paying real estate taxes. But that gets to the issue of, you can get, in the case of one of the buildings, 776 phone calls or pieces of paper saying that our association and my assessment was imposed to put in new balconies or facade improvements, and we want an abatement for that value. rather than have to deal with 776 individual unit owners, we would like to see a system where the association on behalf of the unit owners can approach the OPA and discuss the abatement issue for improvements as well as the appeal issue for individual units.
I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, that's a legal issue that I have to take back to the office, because in a condo situation, well, the entire process is set up for each individual owner to agree their individual assessment. And so it kind of gets murky from the perspective if you have an association who may represent an owner and not the owner not necessarily be in agreement with that. I mean, we get into all type of property ownership issues. So the way the assessment scenario set up, not just here in Philadelphia, but anywhere you go, it's the property owner versus the grievance of the taxes and the rights that go along with that. And so I have to, sit down with my legal team and talk about it.
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk about that further. Any other questions? June?
Yeah, I have a question about the CCD. Does everybody have to join that group? What if they don't want to join the group?
Okay. Well,
I mean, I'm not in your district, but I
then I'm not going to make you join, you're okay.
Fascinating.
Yeah, the Center City District has very distinct boundaries. I think the boundaries are in the plan and budget that I have in the back. We go through a process, which we've just been through, of developing a plan and budget, presenting it to property owners, and there's a method of objection. When we were first created in 1990, we had about 12% of the property owners object. In each of the 5 renewals that we've been through, we've had 1 or 2 property owners object. So we're getting obviously very, very strong support. It is a mandatory charge. It has the same force of law. But as it relates to condominiums within the boundaries of the CCD, what we are doing for next year is the charges that we have been levying on properties will be cut in half. So that's our basic change going forward. But we're not in an expansionist mode. I should tell you that the Symphony House requested to come into the Center City District. And we have amended our boundaries to extend on Broad Street down to Lombard because the Symphony House and other property owners requested. But we do no annexation whatsoever, so rest assured we're not going to get.
So this is pretty unique to the whole, to the city. I mean, there are no other districts that have this mandatory kind of.
No, there are actually 12 districts that are tax assessment districts like ours. Each one can set its own way it's handling this, and there's a variation. There is an Old City District, there's a South Street District, there's a Manayunk District, there's one on Germantown Avenue in both Mount Airy and Chestnut Hill. So there are many of them like this across the city now.
Just
Sure.
one last thing. I thought it was really great what you accomplished here in Center City, and I'm just curious. Did you by any chance have to address the motorcycle issue of motorcycles drag racing around the city, as we have to on the Parkway, where motorcycles are drag racing up and down the Parkway? And if so, how did you work with the police to do that?
We've not had that issue in the core of the downtown, and that's the first time I'm hearing about motorcycles racing on the Parkway, so please bring that to our attention. We can certainly look at that. Yeah. Yeah.
We will.
Glad to hear.
Every night.
Okay.
I'll take Marge first.
I have one very simple question relating to your fair housing discussion. Do religious accommodations come into play with that?
You can't discriminate on the basis of religion, but there's really, I don't know any particular practice in the condo that deals with that issue. What comes to your mind?
Shabbat. And people with automatic doors wanting us to rig up that entrance to the building so that on a Friday evening they do not have to use an automatic fob to open this room.
Well, that would be a reasonable modification request to common elements, which would require the requesting person to pay for it. So that may discourage the request. Yes.
I know there's a very large list under community association clients in this booklet, and I'm wondering why folks that live in Rittenhouse Plaza and Kennedy House do not have to pay the Center City tax like we do.
That's not the case. I mean,
So they're not condos, they're co-ops.
They're
Is
co-ops.
their association paying for it and they don't know about it because they claim that they have never paid it?
yeah, each of the associations have made payments to us over the years.
What's
But how come their associations have paid for it and they're not laying it out like we are?
Because they were cooperatives and they were one unit. The legal, I mean, the lawyers are sitting here, but the co-op is one legal structure. The condos were 200 separate units.
The co-op is a corporation that owns the entire building. The individual people have a proprietary lease to occupy a particular unit, but there's one tax bill, one assessment for the entire building. So in terms of special district charges, it's one bill to the entire building. How they pass it through or spread it among the occupants is up to them. I
have a question for Lisa. Lisa?
Darn. I
Sorry.
thought I was
You
going to get
almost
away with
escaped.
it.
One per customer.
I'll make it easy on you. I've been through the housing inspection license application process a few times. Often there is a discrepancy in the actual number of units versus what L&I recognizes. What happens in that and how does that get resolved?
What's actually there, just because it's there doesn't make it legal. In order for it to be legal, you would have to go through zoning to do that. So let's say for the sake of argument that when the structure was converted, it was converted to 200 units. And someone decided, or several people decided that they were going to buy another unit and then knock the walls down and merge units. So now you're decreasing the unit from 200 to, let's say, 190, okay? So when you go to, let's say you're refinancing, and if you're refinancing, the banks only want to see a clear certification statement. So you would come to us and you'd apply for a certification statement, and we would state that the legal zoning use is 200. If no one came in and reduced the occupancy, then we have no way of knowing it. Just because it's there doesn't make it legal. And it's the same going the opposite. If you add units, you have to come back in and file a new use registration permit, and you're going to have to get a new certificate of occupancy.
Well, generally, if a unit were combined, the documents would have been recorded in the courts already.
But that's with the records department. That's not with us. When you do that, you're disbanding another unit. What you really should be doing is, because that unit was owned by someone else and it had its own tax parcel number, so when you do that, you would have to go to both us and to OPA to do that combination.
Lisa, would that require going to the zoning board?
Not necessarily. It's actually easier to reduce than increase. So
Easier to reduce than to increase?
yeah.
Okay. I had another question, because I'm asked this all the time, and I'll summarize it first, because this is what you stated, and I wanted everyone to understand it with regard to the housing inspection license and the high-rise fire license. Buildings are required, condominiums, if they are high-rises over 6 stories, are required to have both licenses, and they have to first register with revenue as a nonprofit organization so that they're exempt from the requirement to have a business privilege license.
Correct.
And then they need to contact L&I to register the address as an association to obtain that unit CA, either for condo association or common area address, so that that can be used on the applications for both the HIL and the high-rise fire. And the question that I'm asked all the time, 2 questions, and one is that if the building has the housing inspection license, individual unit owners who want to rent out their units do not then need the rental license, the individual rental license.
That's correct. The
They
only
can-
thing that they're required to obtain is the commercial activities license.
Right, which we used to call the business privilege license because they're engaging in a business by renting out their unit. But they can show the copy of the housing inspection license for the building
Right.
if need be, in lieu of getting the individual unit.
Or they can come in and they can request a form that we have that we generally seal stating that there is a license on file, stating the license name,
Okay.
the license holder's name and license number.
So the question I get all the time from condo associations who don't really believe me sometimes when I tell them that they have to have the housing inspection license and they have to have the high-rise fire license. They ask me, what's the purpose of those two licenses? So I ask you, what's the purpose of those two licenses?
Let's see. I didn't say that. The housing license basically gives you permission to rent the property out, and it actually registers the amount of units that are there and the responsible party. The high-rise, they use that for all intents and purposes, the high-rise you're not really paying for unless you have commercial space, so it's
The
free.
tenants pay.
And it's used for an inspection so that commercial, industrial, and now the housing inspectors come out and they do their fire checks based off of that because they're under a different umbrella.
And the housing inspection license, which is annual, currently $50 per unit, is for all the units in the building, whether they're rented or owner occupied.
That's correct.
One more, Lisa.
I'm still on the housing inspection license, if you don't mind. Whose obligation is it, the condominium or the
For the housing license,
$50?
it's the condo association's responsibility.
The condo association is defined under the code as the operator of the multifamily dwelling, so it is the responsibility of the association. How they charge it back is up to them. I recommend that they charge it back to the unit owners as a common expense, not a $50 per unit expense, because in some buildings, if they exceed 400 units, which we do have buildings that exceed that, it's capped at $20,000. So you can't charge $50 per unit back as an association. You'd have to charge it on your percentage ownership basis.
Is that a $50 fee in advance or in arrears? What year are you paying for when you pay for that in February?
You're paying for the current year, so right now we're in 2012, 2013. Our fiscal year runs from
March 1st to February, the last day in February.
So when they pay for this in February 2012, what year are they paying? What period are they paying for?
2012, 2013 fiscal year.
Other questions?
You mentioned that a mailing went out last week with delinquent or outstanding licenses. Does that include the housing inspection license?
It was only for the housing and the food licenses.
Housing and food. Will there ever be an actual bill or statement issued for the housing inspection license? Just like he mentioned, as a manager, it's very difficult to explain to your boards or to convince that board to pay that tax when there is no documentation relating to it.
The licenses are a yearly license. So as long as you're current, you'll receive your invoice on a yearly basis. They generally go out in January. So you'll have it. These would have been for people that had their licenses and for whatever reason just didn't pay the license. The license only goes out if it's current, the invoice. So if you're delinquent 2 years, the system's not going to kick it out automatically. You'd have to go back in and retrieve it through this program, which is what they're doing now.
And if you've never had a housing inspection license,
Then you,
we'll never get a bill.
exactly. Which believe it or not, a lot of associations do not have licenses.
I think he believes it.
And
Well,
I've gotten I've spoken to a lot of people and they're telling me, well, we're not going to do it because no one's telling us we have to.
I've managed quite a few
So-
properties in the city limits for the last 6 years, and I have never once seen a bill for a housing inspection.
Well, unless you have a license, you won't get a bill because we wouldn't have the information.
Well, I'll suggest, we had a program several years ago with Commissioner Fran Burns, as you may be aware, where she allowed us to educate our clients, our condo association clients, to get this license initially if they hadn't had it. And there was an amnesty program granted on a temporary basis. That would be a program that would encourage a lot of associations to come forward and sign up again. So I would encourage the department, and you have a new commissioner now, to consider that, and we'd be happy to talk to him about that.
I will let them know that, but just also be aware that even during the inspections, we're going to tell you that you need a high-rise license. The only way you're going to be able to get a high-rise license and not have to pay for that license is if you have a current housing license, which means if you're cited for a high-rise, you have to get a housing license.
I understand that, and I'm actually going through that right now with the property. But it's a very difficult sell to ask an association to put out money they've never put out before without something other than, we need this to get another license.
Well, in all
They'll send the Department of License and Inspection. They also have an enforcement division.
Yeah.
So I suggest that you're not.
Well, what happened
keep
was
talking about this.
in the early 90s.
He didn't identify the property.
Well, in the early 90s, both parties were paying. The association, they were paying for a license, and then the individual unit owners were paying for a license also. So.
I understand that.
Paul?
First of all, is there a reward program for turning in the properties? Both of you used the term non-profit when you talked about the condos that needed to register, Lisa, you said they needed all to register. I don't think of condos as non-profit. I think of them as not-for-profit. Is that the same thing? Or is
Same thing. Same thing. Whether it's an unincorporated association or it's incorporated as a nonprofit corporation, they are not-for-profit or nonprofit as far as revenue is concerned and exempt from the business privilege license. Any other questions? Yes,
Just
John?
on my mind, there must be some dumpster fee that came into play recently.
There is.
And then you apply for the dumpster fee, and then the condos are getting hit for like a request for their business privilege tax, which of course they're not responsible to pay business privilege tax. What is the interface here, and why is it that everybody who applies for a dumpster fee that they're required for, the city doesn't seem to know that they're a condo that doesn't have to pay the business privilege?
Who's asking for the business privilege tax? The revenue department?
Yes.
Then
Because you had to apply for a license to get, like, is somebody doing something wrong? You apply for a license to get the dumpster fee. Okay, now you got a license, which is the same number as the business privilege tax, and now they're saying, where's your business privilege tax?
So my question would be, how are you listed with the revenue department? Are you listed as nonprofit or are you listed as a corporation? I've seen some people come in that say that they're nonprofit, but when you look at revenue system, it says that they're a corporation or LLC. So I would go back to revenue and see how they have you listed.
Yeah, our experience has been that until we recently started doing it, none of the associations were registered with revenue as nonprofit. So that's the first step, really, and that's what we've done. We've been registering the associations with revenue as nonprofit. Then we go to L&I and apply for the licenses, and then we don't need that BPL number on the form. And that's how it's been working, right? So I think we'll wrap it up. I wanted to thank everyone for coming here tonight. Thank you for your attention. Thank our wonderful speakers. We had some attendees from PNC Bank. We appreciate their participation in coming here. And does anyone from last year who came to my seminar remember the top 10 list? No one remembers it? I guess I'll have to say it. Josh remembers it. Top 10 list of the most important things that you've learned here at the seminar tonight. My phone number, so you call me, 215-893-8722. Those are the most important 10 items here, and you can call me and I'll answer all your questions.